My name is Andrew Davis. I'm a Senior Director of Methodology at Copado and also author of the book Mastering Salesforce DevOps. And I am thrilled to have a chance to introduce three of my favorite people and thinkers about this topic of DevOps architecture. Abhishek Saxena, who's now with Copado, Blanca Carter with Slolom, and Jason Ross. And so I would love to have you guys give a little bit of an introduction to yourselves now and just let the audience know.
Sure. So, hey everyone, good morning. So my name is Abhishek Saxena, and like Andrew said, I'm now with Copado. I'm working as a technical architect on the sales engineering team. But I've spent about close to 7 years now in the Salesforce DevOps ecosystem. And I have worked with some of the biggest customers out there. I have worked I have implemented a lot of different DevOps solutions, written custom scripts, used all of these tools, customized them for some of the biggest clients out there, and hoping to share that knowledge today in this session with all of you.
He did accidentally say biggest clowns out there, but it was a Freudian slip, but people do struggle, so they need advice.
Hi everyone, Blanca Carter from the Windy City here. I am a DevOps architect with Slolom, and I'd like to share that I come from quite a bit of a different background. So I was a Salesforce product owner, turned admin, later admin developer when I learned to code with rad women. It's an organization I volunteer with. We teach women how to code for the system. And now into an architect role. So I am also a consultant, so I know what it's like to be a customer. I know what it's like to be a user. I know what it's like to be a consultant building out the implementations, and I'm happy to share with you today.
And I'm Jason Ross. I'm the principal at Omni Cloud Consulting. I started out my DevOps journey with a ISV who is also a managed services provider, and basically building out our AppExchange product and then customizing the code for our large clients such as Walmart, Hanesbrand, Mattel, Hasbro, and bringing that DevOps process to kind of two pipelines together, one of a managed product on AppExchange, and the second being customized solutions for each of those customer solutions.
Do the names Mattel, Hasbro bring back any fond memories for anybody else here in the audience? Some warm, fuzzy feelings? So this is a session with the architects, so you need to first of all understand who are architects. Architects are people who work on architecture, which means we now need to understand what is architecture. So architecture there's a classic definition, which is that architecture is those parts of the system that are hard to change, those decisions that you make that are hard to change later. So if you think about the architecture of a building, right, there's certain foundational decisions you make, like the foundation and so forth, that are very, very hard to change later. And so architecture is the process of thinking very, very carefully and deeply about those design decisions, about whatever you're building, that are going to have a long-term consequence. And so I tend to think of architecture as being something that is thinking on a longer time scale, a larger scale of the system, and thinking of a wider set of possibilities and risks than we might normally think about. You know, if you're just developing and working in a very narrow scope, you can think, you know, fairly short term, fairly small scale, fairly limited set of possibilities. But if you're architecting, it really requires a pretty broad level of thinking about what might happen to make sure that you're making wise decisions. And so when I was trying to organize my thoughts for the panel, it occurred to me that there's three main things that go into being a skilled architect. And one is experience, both good experience, but especially bad experience. So we'll talk about both kinds of experience. Nothing teaches you better than bad experience. There's this saying, good judgment comes from bad experience, and bad experience comes from bad judgment. So if you've got bad judgment, it's a self-correcting loop. So, so the first is experience, the second is clear thinking, and the third is dialogue and discussion and really connecting with the broadest set of community that you can, and especially the people who will be impacted. So I want to start off by talking about experience. And so each of these folks have a wonderful, diverse experience and background that led them to this role. So I'd love to hear from you about your experiences. Blanca, I don't know, you want to go first?
Sure.
Your background getting here?
I'll tell you how I got started and interested in this. I was in higher ed. We were a small but mighty CRM team. And the person who was managing DevOps for us left the company, went to go work for Salesforce. .org, so it was a good mission. But we lost a wealth of knowledge. And how do we even get our deployments through? What are we doing? Who do we need to find within our company because it wasn't on our team, anyone who had knowledge in it. And having that gap and struggle and trying to flex and literally spaghetti hitting the fan and you're under pressure, there's no pressure like that, not having the knowledge of how you're managing your DevOps and you can't get your deployment through. And realizing, wow, the person left and look at how vulnerable we were. So I actually transitioned into consulting, and while I was on my first client, one of my team members actually had implemented Copado for our small development team to use. And it was the first time that I saw admins, QA folks, developers, everyone managing in the same system, the same tool to help us move smoother and have more successful deployments. And that experience of having a hybrid software development team being successful at deployments was just mind-blowing that I got it done on my nails. CI/CD is the way to go. But that's what transpired into my thirst to learn more about this very challenging area that many people, if you've had a pain point, don't raise your hand, but I'm sure it's almost everybody in this room that has had a pain point or some kind of failure with DevOps. And it's, for me to just say, you're not alone. There's a million other people, in the same city and, all around the world that's struggling with the same thing that you are. And the more that you're learning and reaching out to your networks, you can grow and find better ways to do things.
Awesome. Jason?
Yeah, so my kind of experience with DevOps started from, very, very early on because I was working in the Salesforce ecosystem since 2008. Where there was no tools. I mean, everything was done through Ant deployments, and you would deploy, and things would get overwritten. Environments did not match, and so we did a DevOps kind of framework where we had to basically organize all of our environments just so that we knew that the code that was in our repository was going to match what was in that environment that we were pushing it to, and that there were no changes, because we had a lot of people in managed services that would change pick list values in production because it was easier. They could change the pick list value, and then it would update all those records to the new pick list value. They didn't tell anybody in development, and so when you went to go push a new package, it would, the tests would come back and say, this pick list value is missing, fail. And that happened enough where, I had to search for a product that could make sure that all the environments were synced together and that everything matched, and that I could keep control of only certain individuals pushing to environments and keep track of all the security, because, at the time I was the chief architect for the company and then got promoted to the chief information security officer at the company, and we were a SOC 2 regulated company and ISO 9001, and I had to basically come up with the documentation that says, yeah, this is the process we followed. We did everything correct for these clients. There was no problems with any of this code being deployed. We didn't lose any of their data, and with Copado, I was able to show all that paperwork to the auditors without having to spend a lot of time. I mean, my SOC 2 credentialing went down from like a 2-month process to a 2-week process.
Amazing war stories.
So before talking about my experience, you were talking about who are architects. So that reminded me, the term software architect is somewhat abstract a little bit, but if we think about the architects who are actually building homes, then we can probably start to logically think about what are architects doing. They're doing the design thinking. Where should the walls in my house go? What type of electricity line or what power outlets we need? Where should the sink go? So similarly, in software, they're also thinking about the big picture and how all the different systems are interacting with one another. So that's just a thought I had when you were talking. Now, coming back to my experience and how I got started with Salesforce DevOps is that I learned Git myself when I was in college, and I was using it on the projects that I was building. As soon as I joined the industry as a Salesforce consultant back in 2015, I saw no one was using Git. They were just okay overwriting each other's changes. And they were like, yeah, we sometimes take backup and overwrites happen, but yeah, that's the nature of the game. So that sort of pushed me from day one, even though I was a Salesforce developer, that pushed me to think about how I can use version control in my projects. I didn't know much about CI/CD back then. I didn't know such a thing existed. I just wanted to use version control. So I started to take a look at the other projects that were going on within the SI that I was working for, and I found out that one of our biggest customers were actually one of the architects had written like some Node scripts to actually automate the deployments, and he was creating the package XMLs automatically. Someone does a commit, a differential package XML was created, and it was deployed. So that was magic to me, because I just joined as a junior developer, and I was forced to do release management. No one else, the senior developers didn't want to do that, so I was pushed to do the dirty work. So I was manually creating the package XMLs, and sometimes I made mistakes. I forgot which other developer added which list view. So when I started to learn about that there were other projects that were doing something like this, I went ahead and I tried to learn about all of that. And that helped me gain knowledge about that, hey, how CI/CD is also a thing, and with version control, you can do some sort of automation as well. So once I started implementing that in the projects that I was on as a developer, along the same time, within my previous organization, Aperio, we were thinking of standardizing release management across for all the projects. So Andrew was actually taking that lead, and so we started off an internal product called as Aperio DX, which is now called as Amplify DX. And Andrew was the technical architect for that product. So I joined his team. I joined his team as a lead developer, and we worked together for about 2 to 3 years building that DevOps product. And Salesforce DX started around the same time as well. So I got a lot of opportunities to learn how Salesforce was starting to think about modern developer tooling, and we built a product on top of it. So that gave me a lot of opportunities to learn the internals of Salesforce CLI and what processes were they trying to use to create those package XMLs, environment management, and those sort of things. This also gave me opportunity to learn about the different CI tools that are available in the market and how can we use them. How can we use these generic tools to make them work for Salesforce, because they usually don't. So that's what helped me actually gain a lot of the knowledge that I got for Salesforce DevOps. And then I moved back to consulting and started implementing what I had built. So I not only implemented the product that we had built, but I also got the opportunity to work with the customers who had already purchased some of the other tools like Copado and the other players as well. So that gave me a wealth of knowledge of all of these different tools. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? So that's how my journey has come to fruition over here.
Wow. As you can see, a lot of experience assembled on the stage. One of the things that jumps out for me when I listen to you guys talk is the wide range of things you have to deal with. You know, Jason talking about, you know, SOC 2 compliance, and Abhishek talking about Node.js, and Blanca talking about coordinating the activities of these big teams. So I think often when we talk about, you know, systems, I'm working on the system, so we tend to mean just the IT system, as if that IT system, the code and the configuration existed out in space separate from everything else. But I think a lot of what you discover is that it's tied to people. There's people who are building it, there's people who are using it, it's tied to compliance, to legal restrictions, to processes. You can go deep down into the depths, the technical depths, and you can go high up into the broader context. but there's a lot of stuff that connects, right? And so that's why I mentioned at the beginning that one of the main things that architects need to do is try to think clearly about this big picture and try to take into consideration all of these aspects, the human aspects, compliance aspects, technical aspects, and try to figure out how to think well about all of that. So I'd love to hear from you guys, anything that you do to help you to think clearly and make wise decisions when you're making such consequential decisions. Anybody want to start?
I like to watch home remodeling shows. Does anybody, or like those flip your houses things? Well, I really love those episodes where they acquire a home and they need to remodel it, but you like walk into the bathroom and the toilet's like right in front of the sink or like some awkward, weird thing. And then when they remodel, sometimes the plumbing system is all out of whack and has a whole bunch of craziness going on, so that poses limitations. Well, these are the same kind of intricacies that you have to try to manage with DevOps and when it comes to software development and architecting. So I think that it is very, very, very important to not start off thinking you're gonna come out with a big bang and make a rush and you're gonna like implement a new system to smooth over DevOps and it'll be magically done in a matter of a few weeks. I think you have to take a step back and understand that this is something that needs true investment. And what I mean by true investment is that it's gonna take time to think through it and plan through it properly. Before you can plan through it, you need to have the proper stakeholders engaged and you're working with, the maybe contractor who's gonna be working on the home and maybe you have some, city officials who have to come and do the inspection later, give you some advice in advance, or these are the same kind of things that architects do. We just do it with the stakeholders that are part of the business and a part of our software development team. I think that if you don't have enough information to understand the business, understand the software development needs, then you can't even start to paint the picture of what a future of a successful DevOps culture and mindset could be for that team. So having clarity and not rushing through it is very important. I know timing is of the essence, but you have to make sure that you have the right building blocks and foundation in place before you can go ahead and start building.
So I agree, definitely agree with Blanca over here. I just got reminded of another funny story about clear thinking. So when I was transitioning from my product role and came into consulting, before that, I always had a technical manager who was helping me decide that what I was thinking was correct or not. They were sort of giving me directions that, hey, this is where we should go. But when that sort of pressure left and I started to become an architect, and around the same time, I became really scared that, hey, how do I take decisions now? Until now, there was someone who was guiding me that what is right, what is wrong, what should we do, but now that responsibility has fallen onto me. So I became a little nervous because that was my starting point in the architect journey. But what that helped me think through was that how to take on more responsibility. And once you take on responsibility, you have to get away from your thinking where you are just doing the tasks that are assigned to you. You have to rather think about the broader picture that, hey, how my decisions are going to impact every other team that is working there as well. So you need to have that clear thinking, like we are talking about, that logical thinking, and you need to think about, okay, if I do X, then it's not just gonna give me Y, but Y will do Z, and before X, I have to get some other stuff as well. So you have to take on that responsibility, and it is a little bit scary jumping into that architect role, not gonna lie, and you will make some mistakes, but you need to make sure that you are owning those mistakes, and those are hopefully not catastrophic.
Yeah.
Pro tip, just don't make any catastrophic mistakes and you'll be fine. That's all.
Well, I'll just say lean on people. Lean on your teams, lean on your mentors, whether that's internally at your company, on your software development team, or externally. And one thing I can say about the Salesforce community is that we have an abundance of people that want to help because they know how painful things can be and they want to help someone not have to go through all of that drama.
And to that, I think the important thing, I think about, when I've actually been successful as an architect, it's actually by having somebody that thinks different than I do to basically say, oh, that's not going to work, you should do it this way, and then we argue back and forth about how the solution should be. And that devil's advocacy is really nice. So you definitely need somebody, that thinks different than you do, but then you also need somebody that can support you.
When I just to add on to that, and this reminded me, when I started off as a DevOps architect, there was no other DevOps architect in my company. So I couldn't take help from anyone else. Everyone was looking up to me that, hey, you have been working in this space for so long, you tell us what to do. So it was a little bit scary, but yes, you eventually learn once you are thinking through those scenarios, you implement a few things on your own, you find out that, okay, what works, what doesn't work, and you have to be your own supporter for that.
And I'm glad to reflect that things have changed a lot just in the last few years, where there are a lot of people with a lot of DevOps architecture experience. There's a lot of potential mentors, and maybe in this space, even if you're the only one at your company, the senior most person at your company, you may find today at this conference, hanging out here in Trellis, other people from other companies who you can make friends with, reach out to, make connections to. Maybe folks on the panel have spare capacity. But Blanca recently posted on LinkedIn that she had joined how much she had benefited from her own mentoring program. She'd mentioned Rad Women Code. Tuche was one of her mentors. And now she joined the Copado Mentor program and is starting to pay that forward, right? And so that kind of network of sharing, training, that it's coming from experience, but also empathy. Like, I've been there. I've experienced that difficulty. I've had to deal with pick lists and package XML files and so forth. So I feel you. So I think I mangled the quote earlier, but I wanted to recap it because I love this quote. Good judgment comes from, good experiences come from good judgment. And good judgment comes from bad experiences. And bad experiences come from bad judgment. So there's a self-correcting loop. So I did want to linger back on experiences here. And what are some things you guys had to learn the hard way? What are some things you kind of wish you'd done differently in retrospect? But anything come to mind?
So when I think about it, what I had to learn the hard way was that the buy-in from the leadership, and not just a technical leadership, but the business leadership as well, is really important, because otherwise it's really tough to implement those decisions. DevOps is a team sport, so it's not just one person that, hey, we have a release manager, he's gonna do everything for us. DevOps requires everyone to contribute to the process, and only then it works, right? That's the basis of DevOps. So what I've had in the experience that I've had in past is that it becomes really challenging if I'm the only one who is preaching that, hey, this is how we should do things, and the other architects or other business leaders are thinking that, okay, we'll just, if release management is becoming a problem, we'll just get another release manager. And they are not enforcing that to the developers or the admins of the project, because then they sort of think that, hey, this is not my job. I'm not a release manager. I'm not going to commit files. This should be that person. So they sort of like shrug off responsibility. So I think having that, if there's already a buy-in from the leadership and people start talking and thinking about DevOps from the moment the project planning has started, and it doesn't become like an afterthought just a week before production deployment, then that helps quite a lot.
And I've actually had an opposite problem where I've had, board approval and senior leadership saying, yeah, we should implement DevOps and do this right. And then, you get the grumbling at the people that actually have to do it and not spending enough time with them to get buy-in from them to bring the project up.
I think one of the biggest things that I have learned is that DevOps is not one size fits all. Right? So what works for one company and one software development team is not necessarily going to work for the next to come. So in that, I think it's making sure that you're doing an assessment to see where the company's at, to see where the software development team is, to see where the expertise lies, where the gaps are, how you can poke at what we need to have but we don't have. And I'm going to come back to this word that I mentioned earlier, and it's investment. This is an investment, not just from the leadership, the executives that are going to support it and be the champion for DevOps and also pay for it because it is costly, right? But there's a big ROI on doing DevOps correctly. And I think some of the part that also gets missed is the investment in your people. Those that are taking part at developing the DevOps process and culture along with the architects, right? This is not done in a silo. This is not done by 1 or 2 people, and then they are wearing 50 other hats for other tasks and roles that they play at the company. That's not fair, and that's not a proper investment, right? So I think that you need to understand that one size fits all has different flavors. You have to do some soul searching to figure out what your company and what your software development team needs, and make sure that you have their back and you're supporting them financially, and also just making sure that you're setting the tone and setting the precedence for that culture and that change that's going to come, because a lot of people can be resistant to change, especially if it's going to cause headaches and give them some more time to do their work. No one's going to want to adopt it, right? But you need to really relate to everyone on the team and get their buy-in in the sense of, this is why it's beneficial for you to adopt this new process, or why we need to start collaborating and sharing the pain points that we have, and be transparent, because the more transparent that you are, then as a team and as a company, your eyes are wider open to where the gray areas are, where the pain points, bottlenecks, and failures are that you need to address, and then the fun part of prioritizing them, right? But don't try to tackle everything at once, and make sure that you're investing in, not just from a financial standpoint, but investing in your people to skill them up and make sure that they have this space to collaborate and believe and trust the culture.
And also listen.
Yes.
So, a lot of people ask questions, and they just ask questions just to ask questions. But you actually have to listen to the answer and kind of respond back and have that mutual agreement of, I'm listening to you and I'm taking into account what you're saying.
I'm reminded of a couple of ideas. One is that a real open-mindedness means going into a conversation with a willingness to change your point of view, right? And that's as opposed to this pretending to listen or being open-minded, but not actually being willing to change and shift. So that's a very, very deep open-mindedness. It's a different form of transparency. It's, instead of inside to out, it's kind of outside to in. It's like, tell me, what are the concerns that you have? I'm also reminded there's a Patrick Lencioni, popular management strategist, says that a healthy team will have conflict because it shows that the team bonds are strong enough to withstand conflict. So if you can have a heated disagreement about something, but no, you're still friends, it doesn't mean Jason hates me just because he's strongly disagreeing and so forth, that's a sign of health, right? And that's what really enables robust communication, because some of these things are really in tension. And we talked about, we're all at different places in our journey, and some of you may be newer, and this stuff feels and sounds very, very daunting. Maybe some people have gone through similar journeys. What has been mentioned here already, it's a lot, right? There's a lot of considerations and a lot of systems. There's IT systems, as I mentioned. There's human interaction systems. There's compliance and regulatory systems. We've mentioned a couple of others. There's economics, right? How much money is being invested in team training and slowing down to accomplish more? There's politics in the sense of power differentials in the company, like who get leadership buy-in, as Abhishek said, right? Figure out where are the power differentials that enable things to get done, what are the economic incentives, and if you've never had to think through such a broad set of considerations in your job, if your job has just been working on IT systems, it's daunting to begin to think about people and compliance and money and politics and so forth, but that's where we just need to be stretching ourselves gradually. And so earlier on, I said that in my mind, there's three main aspects to being a skilled and qualified architect. One is experience. We've talked about that. One is clear thinking, and the other is dialogue. And I think you guys have already gotten into that. The idea that you might not have buy-in at the higher ranks of the organization. You may not have buy-in at the lower ranks of the organization. Anybody want to share anything about in the change management process and how to actually help people change, whether that's executive decision makers appreciating that they need to slow down to speed up, or individual contributors understanding they need to learn a few more skills if they're going to be effective working together?
So you brought a really good point here, Andrew, and that's exactly what I was thinking about. Whenever I got rolled onto a project as a DevOps architect, the chances were I had to do a training, DevOps training first, because my developers did not know how to use Git. So the way I had the most success having people actually understand the importance of DevOps was I used to go there and first of all, having empathy with everyone. I used to tell them that, hey, I have been in your shoes. And people used to tell me the same thing that, hey, why do we need DevOps? We have been delivering Salesforce projects for a decade now using chain sets and package XML. Why do we need this new thing? That was usually the reception I got. But I used to empathize with them that, hey, you are doing really valuable work. And if you have to repeat it because of overwriting, then that's not going to be great for you, right? Plus, whenever I used to start these training sessions where I used to explain like the basics of Git, I used to tell them that, hey, if you want any career within sales, with not only in Salesforce, but in software engineering, Git is a mandatory skill. Even if you want to go out of Salesforce and do something else, Git is a given. It's not just a skill. All software engineers should know about it. It's kind of sad that it traditionally has not got that importance within the Salesforce ecosystem. But outside Salesforce's smaller bubble of developers, everyone knows how to use Git from their college. So if you want to progress in your career, this is a really mandatory skill. So just being there, empathizing with them, and explaining to them the importance of how this is going to help them grow as in their role and get to the next level, rather than just telling them that, hey, you have to do this, there's no other option. This is how we do stuff within the company. That helps quite a lot, especially with the individual contributors who have not had that much of experience within the industry and have just started out.
I can go next. The one thing that I like to say about dialogue is to have a dialogue with yourself first, right? Because I think that sometimes, depending on where you're coming from, if you're an architect or if you're more technical, depending on how you've been doing DevOps in the past and depending on how the team is structured, sometimes you have to be creative when you're thinking with yourself and look at, one, being truthful is important, right? So not just thinking something and saying, yeah, that's going to be the way or the highway. That's not going to work, right? Sometimes you have to, although you want to say, like Abhishek, I just got to tell folks this is how we're doing it and that's it. But what I've learned is you have to know the people that you're going to work with. You have to know the people on the team that are going to be taking responsibility and ownership of pieces of DevOps at the company. And what I like to say is have a dialogue with a diverse pool of team members, especially in the Salesforce ecosystem. I think it's not always developers, right? We have very strong admin config folks. I think sometimes you have folks like me who are admin developers who, don't do programming every single day, but we can read it, we can understand it. Maybe we want to be dangerous. No, we don't. But, just be honest. And when you're thinking to yourself, make sure that you're keeping it real and understanding what are the players that I have. It's a team sport wholeheartedly. You have to understand them and understand their interest areas, understand their expertise, and understand how people can get acquainted on how to work well together, because it's going to take the whole team to execute in order for it to be a win. And know that even when there is a failure, have a dialogue about that, because you want to learn from those failures. You don't want to have those fumbles, and understand that when you're losing, sometimes you're winning and you're having an epiphany about, damn, we didn't see that earlier, and that was a gap, and how did we miss that? And let's think about this so we don't do it again. So the dialogue is never ending, and use it as a feedback loop to take it back, strategize, plan, and then change your process or tweak your tooling how it needs to be, or educate and invest in your team members so that you are always iterating to success with DevOps, because DevOps is as important, if not more important, than software development and the CRM you're building.
Yeah, I think the greatest success I've gotten from working with teams have been lunch and learns. People are more open when they're getting fed.
Notice the suspicious similarity to the breakfast with the architecture, but go on.
And people are more open and less aggravated when you're kind of in an open dialogue about things versus a training seminar where you must learn this. The other thing is small wins. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is architecture. So you got to think about how you can be agile and do small incremental changes that don't raise people's flags.
Just adding on to one thing that Blanca said, that DevOps is equally important, if not more, than the software development itself. So this reminded me of one quote that I learned from our previous CTO at our last organization. He talked about that how the system of work is more important than the work itself. If your best engineers are focused on making sure that the system of work through your work is flowing, can be elevated to the next level, then automatically any work that you do that is flowing through that system of work is elevated to the next level without even thinking about it. So already creating those good quality rules, and you have like a pipeline that follows all the good DevOps practices. If your best people are focused on elevating that, then even the junior members who are part of the admin or the dev team, who are pushing their work, they'll get an automated feedback. They don't have to wait to ask a senior technical person that, hey, am I doing this right? Should I put a SOQL query in a for loop? They'll get an automated feedback from that system that has been created. So that's why I wholeheartedly agree that that DevOps is equally, if not more, important than the work itself that we are focusing on.
Amazing. So, I mean, systems, we talked a lot, the word keeps coming up, systems, right? One of the main characteristics of systems are feedback loops. Do something, see what happens, learn, change, do something, see what happens, learn, change. And the feedback loops can be automated feedback loops. They can be human feedback loops where you hear from the developers, oh, I don't like this, or could this be easier, or how do we change this, or whatever. Yeah, there's, go ahead.
Don't forget about your metrics. Who knows their KPIs and their DevOps metrics? If you don't know them, those are your feedback loops too, right? They're data that you can rely on, and if you're not tracking and collecting enough data to formulate the metrics that you need to know, then you also need to incorporate that into your plan.
And so this, this idea that the system of work is more important than the work, it reminds me a lot of the idea that one of the best things you can do as an individual is invest in yourself, invest in your own health, physical and mental health, invest in your own education, and so forth. And that investing in yourself naturally increases your capacity to be of more benefit to others. So I would think of DevOps as being that aspect of software development that is reinvesting back in the process, that's reinvesting back in improving software development itself. And just like improving ourselves, brings incredible gains over time, exponential gains over time. So reinvesting in the process brings exponential gains over time. So I want to make, as a last point here, just any advice you might offer to somebody who's starting out their journey as becoming a software architect or a DevOps architect or learning DevOps? Any advice you might have for individuals or teams? Let's go around.
I'm on Twitter at Blanca V. Leon. Outside of being a Copado champion, I'm also a Salesforce MVP, a Golden Hoodie, and an ambassador for Salesforce as well, architected. Yesterday morning, actually, I was hesitant. I was in the elevator, and I was on my way to day 0 of a training for the well-architected ambassadors. And I had a moment where I was like, oh my, what am I gonna say that's gonna be like, you know, a good contribution? I'm gonna be in a room with a bunch of CTAs, and like, they know more, and they've been in here like 10 more years than I, and I had this moment of just feeling a little bit of nervousness and wondering, what do I have to bring to the table? And then yesterday evening, you know, it hit me. There's this question: what does it mean to be a trailblazer? What does it mean to be a Copado champion? I think what it means is you feel the fear and you still give it a go. You give it all you got, you try it. If you're scrambling, tap into networks. Join the Copado mentorship program. I just raised my hand to be a mentor for the first time. A part of me was nervous too, like, oh, do I have enough hands-on? Like, you know, you still like, who am I gonna get matched up with? But then I remembered that Tuche, sitting right here, who also was working at Copado and then moved on to other fun DevOps adventures. And when we got partnered up, it was a blessing because I needed someone that I can be my full self with and not be intimidated and be vulnerable in order to get the right support and guidance so that I can succeed. And fast forward, it's been 2 years. And I've had a lot of fun in the DevOps area and now sitting as part of this architect community. And so in you, there is a trailblazer, there is a Copado champion, there is whatever it is that you want to be, that DevOps champion on the business side of your company who wants to make sure that your teams are successful. Just do some soul searching and find that trailblazer or Copado champion.
I mean, the advice I have is to be diverse. So, you know, don't just go down one path as an architect. Look into other things, even stuff that you're uncomfortable with, because the more well-rounded education you have around things, the more that your world perspective opens up and you look at things that you wouldn't have seen before.
So what I just want to add to what Jason just said, that what I've seen happening is that usually when people are searching for a DevOps engineer or release manager, at least that used to, I've seen that quite a lot in multiple projects, they get someone who is just starting out sometimes within the Salesforce ecosystem, let alone being knowledgeable about what is DevOps. So being on the path of a DevOps engineer to a DevOps architect, this is not something that you should get started with. You should have a diverse experience being a business analyst, a developer, an admin, so that you at least, and QA, absolutely QA, so that you know what are the problems because of which DevOps is important. Until and unless you have faced them yourself, that pick lists are horrible, profile deployments are a scam, and package XML is just absurd, you have to do it manually. Unless you have faced them yourself, you cannot empathize with why is this needed and the importance of the art of DevOps. So spend some time in some of these different roles, any of the different roles, which give you like a broader picture of where are things going wrong, what are the bottlenecks in the system, and then you can transition on to this role where now you have this background of what could you do to remove those bottlenecks that you have faced in your other roles that you were playing.
Can we get a round of applause for the architect?